That's what's paying our bills.
That's the only way things are being paid
Oh,
now.
gee.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. Okay, we'd like to welcome you to Fabric Chicks Live at noon. We have Linda McGehee with us today, and she's going to be telling us all about the Piping Wizard and all of the exciting things that we've got planned coming up. We've got a class. All right, hang on a second. Okay, like we had nobody on, and now we've got 16 people on.
All right.
Okay. All right, let me see. Hi, Ann. Hi, Peggy. All right, what do you need? Okay, just a second. Okay, so we're just gonna go over this real quick in case you've just joined. Hi, Mary Lou. So we do Fabric Chicks live at noon every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And today we have a special guest, Linda McGehee, who is going to be demoing and telling us all about her Piping Wizard and how we can add amazing piping to our projects, whether it's pot holders, eyeglass holders, quilts, vests, you name it, you can add embellishments. And garments, of course. Okay, so Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're going to be demoing and all that good stuff.
Okay.
All right.
She can measure
Sounds
it.
good. Thank you so much. Hello,
Okay.
everybody. Welcome to the new year. We're excited to do some more fun playing with fabrics and threads. And something that I've done for a long time is corded piping. And corded piping is a little tiny cord inside a piece of fabric. And what it does is add a little extra pizzazz to your work. For instance, just to give you an idea, this is a bag that has spiral patchwork, and there is corded pipe, and the stripes that you see right in here is actually corded piping. But let's take a look at what the same thing would look like without corded piping. It's just kind of blah. I mean, it's nice until you've seen the added detail. Now, because this bag was made out of leftovers from another project, I didn't have enough to make the other side exactly the same. So the other side just has a pocket. And of course, we add the corded piping to it, and it just gives a nice little bit of detail. Now, corded piping can be all sorts of sizes, but one of the hottest things that's been going on with quilts is to use corded piping to frame the outside of along the edge of the binding. And this is a very, very tiny cord that's inside the piping. It's a high contrast color, and it just gives you a little bit extra. It makes you look like you're fancier than just a plain old binding. When I got ready to put the binding on this, I put a black, and it was like, oh, that's nothing. It's not really working. So I had this tiny stripe, which was in good proportion for the project. And it had all these multiple colors that were kind of sort of in the project. If you look at it very close, they're not the exact colors. So those of you have to be matchy, like many people were in the sewing industry with their thread and their fabric, then you need to get over that, because you need to have a little bit of a high contrast. And so what if the colors aren't exactly the same? But the corded piping just adds a nice little detail to this little quilt. A friend of mine, Sue O'Very Pruitt, she just added another name to her names, and she does embroidery. And she sent me some samples of her sewing embroidery. This is the rotary cutter. And she had trimmed the samples. And it's like, that's not big enough to do anything. I think she really sent me the samples just for me to see. But I was going to use them because I had this wonderful fabric that had spools of thread. And it just like, I just saw it as a sewing tote. So what I did was use corded piping to frame the edge of the embroidery, and then come back and do sort of a stitch and flip to add more fabric to build it till it was large enough to make a pocket. Now this piece was trimmed pretty close, but I'm okay with the embroidery just come into the corded piping. It might have preferred to have a little bit more fabric, but this is all I had, so you work with what you have sometimes. On the other side, there is another sewing with spools and threads and pin cushions and things like that. So the tiny corded piping was added around the edge. So you add the piping on each side, and then you add it to the top. Those of you who are quilters are familiar with the term log cabin. So this is added in the order of a log cabin. I do a lot with garments. Well, not as much lately, but I started off as a garment person, and I got into the bag arena. So over the 30 years that I've been doing bags, I've done all sorts of playing with different styles of bags and created different patterns. But this particular one that I call the hobo tote is curved all the way around the edge. It does have corded piping. This time it's not a contrast, it's a little bit larger corded piping. And notice how it gives a nice smooth curve to the edge. If I had just stitched a seam allowance all the way around, I would have, well, this would probably be pretty smooth, but then I would start getting these bent curves. I don't know what else to call it. But the corded piping makes this stay nice and smooth. On another bag, a different style, lots of different decorative threads, and this is a combination of jeans thread and quilting thread. And to combine the front to the back, there is corded piping. So corded piping can act kind of like sashing does to separate it into fine areas. And it just gives a little bit more touch of class to whatever it is you're making. Now on this garment, and if you're on my newsletter, I sent out a newsletter this morning and I actually had this picture in it. If you would like to be on my newsletter, just go to ghees.com, GHEES.com, and sign up for the newsletter. You're not really inundated with a lot of emails because I'm the one that does it, and I'm not going to send you a message every single day unless we have a class or something special happening. But this is a vest that has the piecing that I wanted to be in the background. So there's no corded piping in this area. The corded piping is around the armhole, and it's not a high contrast. It's there to help maintain the shape of the arm, give it a nice curve, and there's no need, because the corded piping can stabilize, there's no need to have interfacing under there to add extra bulk. In this particular instance, I've placed raw edge applique on top. So the original fabric is this one, combined with black with the piecing and then the raw edge applique. And the corded piping just gives a nice little detail finish coming around the neck and in the armholes. Other times you might want to use corded piping to just make your piecing stand out. There's corded piping in between each row of the piecing here. So this gives you an idea of some of the things you can do with corded piping, but exactly what is corded piping? Corded piping is a cord, and you can see I've got real big cords here. It can be cotton, it can be poly. So you have choices, and I want you to be aware when you shop for corded piping, some of it that has sort of a little mesh over top of a cord is designed for home dec. The cord's usually larger. Well, it is larger, you can tell that. And a heavier fabric like a canvas is going to go on top of it. So when a heavier fabric goes on top, this will appear to be smooth. To my eye, to put a cotton, 100% cotton, like we're used to with quilters, on top of this, you would still see the lumps and bumps. And I don't want to see the lumps and bumps at this particular time. You may find some cord that looks like rope. And I think with this larger cord, you can see the twist better than you probably can in the smaller cord. This is 100% cotton. And the larger the cord, the more twisted it is, I guess, or more lumps and bumps that's on it. If I were making something, again, out of a heavy fabric like a denim, I think this would be okay. But if I'm working with cottons, like the quilters cottons, I would put another layer of fabric in between the outside layer, and that so that I don't see the twist. The twist, in all probability, is not going to look good as a corded piping. So there are other cords, and this cord is like you would put on window shades. And again, you can get it in different sizes. This is a 2 millimeter. I like working with the 2 millimeter. I will go to slightly smaller, particularly depending upon the project. If you were making kids' clothes, you might want to use a smaller. They use a lot of corded piping around the edge of collars for detail and things of that nature. But this is a synthetic. It's a polyester, so it's not going to shrink. However, a cotton could possibly. It just depends upon the quality of the cord that you get. So you can tell there's a wide range of cord available to us. So essentially and I think I'm going to work with this larger cord just so you can see what I'm doing as opposed to the tiny cord. So you have a cord to make corded piping. What you do, let's turn it around the other way, is place the cord in the center of the fabric, and then you will stitch next to the cord. And then this cord is inserted in a seam allowance to add detail. So how wide do I cut the cord? Well, 50 years ago, when I first learned to do corded piping, they told us to measure the cord, add for your seam allowance. And it was for tiny corded piping, you can end up with a strip that's maybe 1 inch. And cutting a strip perfectly 1 inch and then sewing, folding this over and dealing with a 1/2 inch strip and keeping those cut edges even is a real booger. It's not as much fun to do, but I just persevered for the time being. Then it dawned on me that if I cut the fabric a little bit wider and just wasted a little bit fabric, I could stitch this down and trim the excess off. The reason I do this is because that seam has to be perfectly even to continue my stitching. If the seam is uneven, then these lines are going to become wavy. If the seam allowance is too big and I'm using it as a guide, this can become very bulky and thick. So I talked with Easy and devised a tool that we call the Piping Wizard. Now, if you've ever seen me at a show, the husbands really are intrigued with this because it looked like something that should be in the garage. But the tool has grooves in it. So on one side, there are 1/4 inch grooves. I'm going to use an awl just so you can maybe see the groove a little bit better. There's a 1/4 inch groove with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a 1/4 inch groove with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on one side. On the other side, there's a 1/16 of an inch groove with a 1/4 and a 1/2 inch allowance, and an 1/8 inch with a 1/4 and a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now, I'm from the age that does 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch and 1/16 inch. I'm not a millimeter person, but I think they did end up labeling this with, no, we kept it with 1/4 inch and whatever. But it's like 6 millimeter, 8 millimeter. You can tell from the size of the grooves what size cord would go in it. So we're going to say make some 1/8" corded piping. Just go ahead and cut some strips 1.25 inches. I mean, you've got plenty of fabric most of the time, so go ahead and cut it 1.25 inches so that we have some to work with, and then trim the excess off. I was taught to use the bias, and true, the bias does make your corded piping lay nice. If you're working with a straight, like this is going to be a pillow, and the corded piping is a straight seam, I don't have to have corded piping, or I don't have to have the fabric strip cut on the bias. I can use the crosswise grain. The crosswise grain has a little bit of give. The lengthwise grain doesn't have much give at all. So you want to work with the crosswise grain. There are times when I'm working with a stripe, and I had a striped piece of fabric here somewhere. Well, we can take a look at another sample. The original fabric was a little plaid, and I decided to put the back on point just because it looked better. And I cut the cord piping on the bias because it would work better on my piping. If I didn't stitch perfectly straight down one of those lines of the plaid, then everybody would know it. But cutting it on the bias made all the difference in the world. So a plaid and a stripe, I do have a tendency to cut on the crosswise, on the bias. I have found some printed stripes that were printed on the bias, so I cut them on the crosswise grain. The object is to have just a little bit of give with your fabric. Now, when you cut strips on the crosswise grain, you want to handle them as little as possible. This is a strip that's traveled with me. I pulled it out of the suitcase, and you can see that I've started to get a lot of little ravels on the way. Seam allowance has not been trimmed. So if I ever decide to use this in something, actually, I think it's the leftover from another project, I will trim the seam allowance and get rid of all this excess, because that seam allowance is important for the accuracy of the next stitching. So let's take our cord and put it inside our fabric. And I'm using, again, a larger cord just so you can see it a little bit better. Placing it inside our fabric, fold the edge over. And traditionally, you're taught to use a zipper foot. I'm going to use what's called a piping foot. And there are several different varieties available for every sewing machine company. This is the foot, and it's actually a 3-groove pin tucking foot that I would use for tiny corded piping. This is the groove that I would use for 1/8 inch, and this is the groove that I would use for 1/4 inch. Now, if you were on my newsletter today, I did this weekend, last week, I gave you pictures of feet so you would see exactly what the feet look like. So when you talk to your dealer about the foot, let them know that you're doing corded piping and there is a foot available for your machine. These happen to be Bernina, but I have an assortment of other feet, creative feet, makes 2 different sizes, grooves. Sometimes the feet are plastic, sometimes they're metal. It just depends upon the manufacturer, but every single sewing machine company has a foot like this to sew your corded piping. And the reason you want the foot is because of accuracy. It's a lot easier to sew with this foot than it is the zipper foot. So what we're going to do is place where's something that's not cut off yet. We're going to place the foot, and I have a double, I'm working with the double groove foot. So if you're left-handed, you could do it one way. If you're right-handed, you could do it the other way. This is the way I do things. Okay. Place the cord in the groove and move the needle a little bit away from the cord. You don't want to be exactly on top of the cord. You want to be 1 or 2 oomps. You know, you have that button where you can move the needle position back and forth. That is my favorite button. You can just get exactly where you want the needle to be. So I want the needle away from the cord, like a 1/16 of an inch, a 32nd of an inch. I don't want the fabric tight in the cord. We will stitch the length, and then we'll clean off a little bit. We will take the tool. What do I have? The 1/4 inch cord. I'm going to choose the groove that has a 1/4 of an inch and a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Place it, I think you can see this. Place this on your cutting mat. Use your rotary cutter and cut the excess off. Now, people have said, why don't you have a longer tool? Well, that's a lot of weight and it's a lot of plastic. This is large enough for you to cut, shift, cut, shift, cut, shift. We had to make the tool a little bit thicker because of the 1/4 inch corded piping. A lot of quilters only use tiny corded piping, but I use heavier, and I wanted to have 3 sizes in my tool. I probably should have picked up a rotary cutter that had a good blade on it. Can you see what I trimmed off? And that I have a perfect 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm now ready to place this on my fabric, and I can baste it in place. And you're actually stitching it in place, but use a length like a 4 to stitch all the way down. You are using the groove of the foot that you used to create. So if you were working with 1/4 inch, you'll use the 1/4 inch groove in the foot. Stitch the length that it goes, and then lay another piece of fabric on top. And this time you will move the needle on your machine as close as you can get it to the cord. So those other stitches will never show from the top. See, you cannot see any of the other stitches. And I'm going to turn this on the back side so that you can see how everything, the stitchings are just a little bit away from each other. They're not exactly on top of each other. And therefore, you cannot see any stitching on the outside. In my past life, when I first learned, we were using a zipper foot. We had to stitch on top of that row of stitching, put another piece of fabric on top, and we used that stitching as a guide. And it was not supposed to show, but it never failed. It always showed somewhere, particularly in curves. So you don't have that problem when you're using the feet and moving the needle position over. And you will always have nice straight seams when you're working with the piping tool to trim the excess off. Okay, let's take a look at some other examples and how corded piping really did dress this up. I was kind of surprised at how many schools have tigers as their mascots. I thought there was only LSU Tigers, but I have since learned differently. But I had a friend make a cross stitch embroidery. This is computerized embroidery. This is not a hand cross stitch. So it takes, I think it's about 90 minutes to stitch that out. I wanted to use that as an inset on the side of the bag. So there is piping, and the difference between piping and corded piping is there's a cord and corded piping, and piping is just a flat piece of fabric, kind of like a flange is what some people call it. So across the top and the bottom is fabric folded, and on the side is corded piping. So it does, and the other side is the corded piping is separating and defining the seams. Both of these seams are curved, but look how smooth the curve is. So we have our tiger bag. Here's another made out of wool. I just ungreed my piece of straight fabric for the piping. So this fabric was printed on the bias, so I cut it on the crosswise grain. Okay, so it looks like it's bias. Wool, and I love playing with plaids, and I like cutting plaids on the crosswise, on the lengthwise, and on the diagonal. So if you're buying a plaid fabric, you must buy at least 2 yards. That will give you 1.25 yards to cut lengthwise, and the balance can go crosswise, and somewhere in there you can cut some bias pieces. But this is a wool tartan, and some of the edges were frayed just for the fun of it. But the outside edge is cord piping made out of ultra suede. Now, some of us still have some ultra suede laying around. The crosswise grain of ultra suede is your bias. So it is not this is an expensive trim as some people think it is when you narrow it down to what you're actually using as a trim. And for the fun of it, this is the selvaged where it says the fabric was made in Scotland. So you use every tidbit of your fabric. It's just a matter of what you're making and choices, choices, choices. One of our patterns is called the pocket pouch, and it too has curved seams, but the corded piping adds a little bit of pizzazz to the side to give detail between all the parts. Now the pattern does have a variation of the log cabin, which is what, and with a triangle and continue. And this looks good, but look how much better it looks when you add just a little touch of embroidery or applique. This happens to be embroidery in that triangle area. It just dresses things up. That's what corded piping does. It dresses it up. There's also corded piping at the top to finish up the bag. It's just a choice thing. If you have the time, add the extra detail. If you're making it for some quick project for Halloween, then it's not that big a deal. But if you're going to use it for a while, it's nice to have the detail on it, because you don't want to say, oh, I wish I'd done so and so. Well, if that's the case, give that one to somebody and make it the one right for yourself. I have to show you this just because it's fun. In most of my bag patterns, particularly the ones that came out after the mid-90s, we put secret pockets. And the secret pocket is in the bottom. It has a zipper closure. It's a place to put your mad money or an extra key to the house. So we do that in lots. Even that big sewing bag has in the bottom of it a spot for your mad money or an extra key to the house.
All right, Linda, well,
take a look at, we want to take a break here?
Yeah, I'm just going to read you some of the comments real quick.
Question for me?
Yep, I got a few questions. Okay, hang on a second. We got hello from so many people. They're so excited that they found us. We've got like Alabama, Texas, Georgia, all over. We want to welcome everybody for joining us. Elizabeth says she's glad your internet's working. Hi, Linda. Chris from Michigan. Sweatshirt conversion with your zipper. Remember, saw you last in Puyallup. Southern California, San Jose.
Yeah.
Wait, say it again.
I said black and white. She did a black and white switch. I know who it is.
Sometimes it's hard to keep track and remember everybody. Okay. And then Pamela says, wait, say it again. Say it again. You're on a little bit of a delay. So,
are you talking to me?
Yep. Talking to you, Linda.
Cut out.
I know. I think we've got a little bit of a delay going on. So just remember, ladies, that we are not technical people. We're not computer whizzes. We're just quilters, crafters, sewers, and we're trying to make the best of this situation. And a lot of times, like Linda is working from her studio by herself, filming herself. So we just are kind of doing the best to bring you what we have to offer, which we would technically usually bring to you at a show in person, where we have a lot more control over the delivery of it. But now we're kind of dependent on the internet and our modem speeds and all that stuff that I don't really understand. But Pamela says, cannot do great and clean piping without Linda's piping cutting guide. Love it, worth every penny.
Nevada.
You're frozen. Maybe I'm frozen, but I think you're frozen, Linda. I don't know. Everything's so delayed.
I'm frozen.
Uh-huh. Now you're not. Now you're not frozen. Well, and we practiced this morning and Linda didn't freeze at all. Okay. So I don't know. Maybe it's just too many people at lunch. Everybody's on their internet trying to text their friends. So Pamela says the piping wizard is worth every penny. Makes your cording and piping look professional. Then we've got Janet from Florida. Vicky says she likes to watch Linda. Good morning, good afternoon. It's much better than last week. And then we've got so glad to see so many. Oh, that was me. Okay, let's see. I know there's somebody here has a question about feet. Oh, Pamela says again, spend the money. It's worth every penny. Great idea on cutting on the bias. Pennies.
You know, so in
that. Okay, girls, let me see. Peggy loves to use ultra suede. It's great for applique. What feet numbers are you using on your Bernina?
Okay, these are from newer ones, but they have them for the older ones too. The 60C, that's the double corded pipe. And the reason it's double is because and this is true, it doesn't matter whether it's on the Bernina, and I'll finish answering that in just a second, whether it's on the Bernina or whether it's on the other feet from other companies. But the groove is so big that if you move the needle over to the right, it wouldn't get to the edge of the corded piping. So what they've done is put the cord to the left and to the right, and you move the needle in the center hole a little bit to the left and to the right. So you're getting a little bit better accuracy. That was 60C. This one is 12, and 12's been around forever, even on the 830s. And 30 is a pin tucking foot, but I use it for the tiny corded piping. So those are the feet on the Bernina.
Okay, and then what if your piping needs to cross over another piece of piping?
Going to cross over, it will meet in a seam allowance. So we'll do a let's pretend, because see, the corded piping goes up to a seam, and then you make another piece over corded piping and then another piece of fabric. It's kind of like, Beth, that's like the project that we're talking about for class we're talking about doing in March. In
February 24th.
I think she's talking about this joint.
Yes, I think so, to eliminate the bolt.
February 24th, we're going to do a class February. Beth will give you the details on that in just a minute. But these two triangles were sewn together with the corded piping in it. And then corded piping was added in this direction and a piece of fabric was added there. Now, if you're working with corded piping that's this thick, it's awfully bulky in the seam allowances. So what you will do, and I didn't do it on this, is pull the cord out, and it's easier to pull out while it's just kind of jagged and not so clean cut. But you will pull the cord out and you will trim the cord off. I'm having trouble. There we go. It's starting to come out. Oh, it's not going to come out because I have this basted. Okay, we can get it together after a while. You pull the cord out to where your seam line is going to be. So if this is my seam line, I would pull the cord out 1/4 of an inch and literally cut it off. Just cut that off and then run your finger on it so that the cord relaxes inside the piping. And the cord will stop about right here. And all you have is fabric going across. So that's how you eliminate the bulk. And this one doesn't have as much because it's a tiny corded piping. But there's a little bit of bulk there that was removed by pulling the cord out. Where it really comes in to play is where you have some of the larger cord. So the cord actually stops at the seam line, but the piping extends to the cut edge. Oh, geez, if that's one of y'all calling me, then I'm not answering. Just it'll go off in a second. I'm hoping you can see in this picture the twisted cord that's underneath. This is where I discovered that it's better.
Hello, thank you for calling Ghees.
Now can I hang up on them?
We'll be happy to get back with you just as quickly as possible. Please leave us your name and number. Remember to
The phone never rings around here anymore, unless it's one of those robo deals.
Monday through Friday. Thanks for calling Ghees.
I can see the twist of the cord. So what I started doing was placing a double piece of fabric, or I used a piece of muslin cut on the bias underneath so I could avoid that twisted look. And I honestly think that the person looking down on it can see it more so than the person looking straight at it. But it bothers me, and if my feeling is, if it bothers you and you notice it every time you think about it or have to make a comment about it every time you look at that sample, then do something about it. So, but I keep that one around so you'll find out. Okay. Here. Lots of bulk in the seam allowance. Cord was pulled off, so the cord is in the bag, but it's not in the seam allowance. So did that get that question?
Okay, then she wants to know, how do you use the zipper foot if you don't have a piping foot?
The zipper foot leans against the cord as you're stitching. You can't, on most zipper feet, you cannot adjust. Well, there's a presser zipper foot that you adjust with the screw back. It's her machine. I promise if you're doing corded piping, it's well the investment of the foot. There's about 10 feet that I use all the time, and I keep them right by my machine. There's a bunch of feet I could care less about. But this foot, the zipper foot, you generally, because of the needle position, get a little bit too close to the cord. So you could back it off and kind of eyeball it. You're going to have to pay attention to what you're doing more so than with the foot. But the zipper foot would go right next to the cord for the stitching. So when you're making the cord, you would still use the zipper foot to stitch the second time. And when you put the other layer of fabric on top, you would use the zipper foot again.
Okay, Linda, so let's tell them a little bit about the class that we have coming up on February 24th. It is via Zoom, and it is a 2-hour class with you where they will actually use the piping wizard and actually get it out of the package, because you know how we're all excited when we see a new demo and we buy the tool, but then we don't actually sit down and use it. So Linda is offering a 2-hour class on the piping wizard. So show us what the project's going to be.
Okay, I'm going to show you a PowerPoint, which you'll get up close and personal on the machine. My feeling is I would rather have a really good close-up photo of what I want you to do than I would you see my hands trying to manipulate around the needle in the sewing machine. So I will do a PowerPoint that shows you the basics, and you can see some up close and personal samples. Then we will also, in a left portion of it, see some newer samples that I've done since, in addition to the PowerPoint. And we're going to do a little sampler like this. And I'm sure you have fabrics around, but this is actually the best way to do this, and the easiest way to cut is to have 3 companion fabrics that are 9-inch square, 8.5 or 9-inch square. We're going to cut all of them at a diagonal and then cut 3 of them at a diagonal. So you will end up making 3 of these. We won't do it all in class, but you will learn how to do that intersection, how to make the corded pipe and how to do the intersection, and put corded piping around the edge. And then you will put binding on the edge. You can use this as a placemat, not a placemat, a pot holder, or you could fold it in half and stitch around the edge and use it for a rotary cutter holder or for an eyeglass case. But it's a usable project, not just a sampler, to learn how to use the tiny corded piping. Now, if you order the piping wizard today, I am putting in piping, the 2mm piping, in with the tool. And I believe they're like $25.99. So you will get 20 yards, a package like this. And this is the size of the corded piping. It's 2mm. It has a $6.95 value, so that'll be a really good deal for you. I have a shipment of new corded piping coming in. I found another company, and maybe I won't have to be the one that measures it off from a big spool. And they were making some smaller spools. So I'm praying that what they have is what I wanted, and the shipment should come tomorrow. Some of the shipping companies weren't working today. I know the postal isn't working today, but everything should go out Tuesday or Wednesday, and that way you should have it in time for the class on February 24th. We have a full month before then. Beth and I were talking about it and talking about making fabric kits with the fabric cut and the batting and everything. But I think y'all have 9-inch squares of fabric around. So I'm going to suggest you use your fabric. I bet you have some batting samples, leftovers from other projects, and you could use fleece if you wanted to. If you're using a thin batting, then you might want to use a double layer. But we're going to stitch the corded piping, learn how to do an intersection, learn how to do the curves, and you won't get it finished, but you'll get this part accomplished. I've gone back and done some extra stitching just to quilt the layers together. But you'll learn, and I have lots of other samples of corded piping that I haven't even shown you today that we'll be taking a look at.
And then can you just show the piping tool one more time for velvet?
Sure. This is what the tool, it's clear plastic. It's just shy of a ½ inch thick, and the grooves on one side for 1/4 inch corded piping, and for 1/8 inch and 1/16 inch corded piping on the other side.
Perfect. And then
It's called the
Piping Wizard.
Yes, it's called the Piping Wizard.
Okay, and I just put our phone number and our website across the bottom in case you have questions. You can leave comments and we'll go back and answer them also. And if you want to purchase the Piping Wizard from Linda today, you can put it in the comments and we will make sure that she gets that. What if they're using a larger cord?
Larger than 1/4 inch?
I think so.
If you're using larger than 1/4 inch, like you're doing pillows, like a cord that's gigantic like this, then you would need to use a zipper foot. This is too large of a cord to go underneath or around the presser foot on the machine. So I did use a zipper foot on this one.
Perfect. So
And actually, this is purchased.
cording. So if you're interested in going into more detail with the Piping Wizard,
You
sign up for the class. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask us. All right. Do you have anything else, Linda, that we want to go over today?
And the class is going to be on February 24th, which is what the week it is, a Wednesday, a Tuesday.
Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday, the 24th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
It's a Tuesday.
Okay. All right. Linda.
So that would be 7 Central.
Wait, say it
I
again.
heard some
You froze up.
Okay. There. It will be 7 Central Time. You mentioned a lot of Texas and people in this area. And it will be Zoom. So Zoom, we're hoping to not have the same technical problems we're having today. I know Beth is cutting out. I hope I'm not cutting out.
You're cutting out for me. Am I cutting out for you?
Okay.
Who knows?
Okay,
so Tina and Sue just posted that the 24th is a Wednesday. You know what? I have a new calendar and it falls on the weird sides of the date. So I'm all screwed up on my days. But February 24th is a Wednesday. So the class is Wednesday, February 24th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And on Zoom, we do not have this delay or anything. So it's a much better quality of presentation. Yes. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay.
Yes.
I will. Oh, there are a couple people who are wanting the Piping Wizard from you, Linda, today. So do you want to give your phone number real quick? Otherwise, you guys can call me and I'll get you in touch with Linda. What's your phone number?
There, go to Ghees, GHEES.com, and you can, it's under Notions, or Sales, Notions, and then everything's in alphabetical order for the Pin Wizard. So they could order directly online. Because if everybody's trying to call me, I only have one line now. And I can only talk to one person at a time. So that might be the easiest.
Okay, perfect. I hope you guys got that. I hope it didn't break up. Sue, I will contact you so that you have everything for the class. Okay, ladies, we will talk to you soon. If you have any questions, just get in contact with us. And we do a live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon. We interview different designers and we do all kinds of fun stuff. So we will see you Wednesday at noon. Have a great day and a half or so.
Yeah. Well, wait, Beth, some of those people who are new to this might not realize that you do a Facebook time on Wednesday. So you're going to be on Wednesday.
Okay, ladies, we're going to go because I don't know, it's just freezing up too much. So we'll see you later. Have a great day. All right. Bye-bye.